Good evening and welcome. We are the Bright Family Engagement Team, and we welcome you to our February kickoff event. The topic today or this month is everything you ever wanted to ask about crisis services. Our program offers monthly peer support peer groups and programs for the year. It's free and available to all parents of children in grades K to 12 anywhere in the country. Our program kicks off in the first week of every month with an educational event such as the one tonight, with 3 consecutive support groups that follow, connecting the topics of each month. You will receive the flyer for next week support groups in our chat. The flyer will also have a link. These are free, and we really encourage that you attend, and they are open to anybody. So the second week of the month is a peer support group for parents for elementary school age students. The third week of the month is a peer support group for parents of middle and high school age students. The fourth week of the month is a peer support group for our BIPOC families. These groups are a way to connect with other parents who are going through the same challenges. So we really encourage that you attend some of these groups. We're excited to have our guest speakers tonight, Sarah and Nicole, to our kickoff educational month theme, everything you ever wanted to ask about crisis services. Sorry, that's a tongue tie, our tongue twister. The Bright Family Engagement Team welcomes you all tonight. I will now pass it over to my colleague, Julie, who will be introducing our speakers for tonight. Julie, it's all yours.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Our first speaker will be Sarah, and she's going to be speaking about parents of kids ages 5 to 12. Sarah is a licensed independent clinical social worker and has worked with adults, children, and families in crisis for the last decade. She graduated from the Smith College for School for Social Work and has worked in domestic violence, safe houses, partial hospital programs, substance abuse day treatment programs, psychiatric emergency rooms, community mental health, and hospital social work. Most recently, she was the manager of social services at a Mass General Brigham Community Hospital, where she oversaw a team of social workers who conducted emergency service evaluations and helped families, children, and adults navigate crisis safely. She transitioned to private practice this year and sees adults virtually in the state of Massachusetts. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about crisis services, which I think is a really interesting mix of both a very special time and sometimes a very scary time. Okay, so what I wanted to speak to today was just some of the nuts and bolts of how to kind of best front load and prepare yourself if you are in a situation where you need to bring a child of this age for crisis services. And I'm going to give just a scope of what I think this could look like and how you can set yourself up for success. So different crisis regions might have slightly different options for how they do this. And I like to say it's like bringing an umbrella on a sunny day. The more information you have about what this process looks like in your hometown and for your crisis team before there's an emergency, I like to think you're just jinxing yourself in a good way that you won't have to use it if you know the answers. So I'm a big believer of get this information, whether you think you're ever going to use it or not. Most catchment areas have a dedicated crisis team that if you are calling someone, whether you're calling 911, whether you're calling the therapist that your child sees with after hours and it goes to a voicemail with some resources, or you're calling your local hospital, most teams will have kind of a dedicated crisis point person. Sometimes that crisis team is available to meet with you where the crisis is taking place, whether that's at home or in the school or somewhere in the community. And sometimes, depending on the situation, they're going to say, this sounds like a big enough emergency that you should get yourself to the hospital and we will meet you there. Sometimes when you are getting that child to the hospital says, we actually have our own internal crisis team that does this. Or sometimes they say, our crisis team is the community crisis team you've been in contact with. They will be coming to the hospital to see your family. So just that in and of itself can be super confusing to figure out, who are you seeing? Why are you seeing them? What agency are they from? Why are they involved? Why aren't they already up to speed on your kid? So I think just before that panicky feeling of impending emergency sets in, knowing some of those nuts and bolts, having that information written down, and understanding how things like what time of day you're seeking this service might play a role. Sometimes there's a daytime crisis team, sometimes there's a nighttime crisis team, sometimes it's the same team no matter what. Having all of that and then having as much information about who is on that team. Is it always going to be a therapist? Is it going to be a therapist and some type of parent partner? Does it depend on the day and the place? As much of that information as you can gather ahead of time, I think can be so helpful. I think too, then knowing just the different players of, okay, the hospital person I'm going to be talking to is this person. In the hospital, you are going to be having some type of medical professional that is overseeing the case kind of from the hospital side. And then there might be a crisis services therapist that is then giving recommendations to that provider. So in some ways, you kind of have two providers. So understanding the names and roles of the different people that are coming into the room and what they're there for. My hope is that all of us would introduce ourselves and say something like, I'm Sarah, I'm the social worker of the hospital. What that means is that my role is this. But if someone's not introducing themselves and their role and where they're coming from, that can be a really helpful moment to just pause and say, hold on just a minute. I'm trying to get clarity. Can you say your name, your role, and where you're coming from again? That can be helpful too for when you're trying to follow up in the days and weeks after the crisis of knowing, oh, I had a really good experience with this one particular person, but I have no idea where they came from. They just kind of appeared in the room and talked to me and it was great. So I would say, try to figure out who they are and where they're coming from. The other thing too, I want to say is that for this age where we're sometimes calling them a pediatric population, there's often different protocols depending on what age your kiddo is. And different facilities and different crisis teams might have a different cutoff age. So sometimes the cutoff, we say, okay, anybody 12 and under is a pediatric patient, anybody 13 to 18, they're in this sort of tween and teenager, and there's slightly different rules for them. So if you have a kid that's on that cusp where they've just turned 13 or they're about to turn 13, getting some information on how does this process look a little bit different than what I'm used to last time or what I've heard friends and family members say. Big things that I have found in my experience that differ. There are some facilities that work with children of a certain age, but not below a certain age. So if your child is very young and winds up needing some type of advanced crisis services care, which could include placement in a hospital, just knowing that there are fewer hospitals in the state that are set up properly to care for a child 12 and under. If your child is 13 and up, there are more facilities, though certainly not as many as there would be for an adult. And again, if your child is on that transition age where they're 17 but turning 18 soon, you have another cusp decision of, is your child going to be better served being in a hospital catering to a pediatric and adolescent population? is your child in a situation where the stuff they're dealing with really in their mental health contains a lot of adult material and they would do okay being placed with young adults? Those are some things to factor in if your kids are kind of on that cusp. So I'm going to kind of pause there for now because I know we've got a lot of rich questions to kind of speak more specifically to, and I can't wait to get into this in more detail with you all tonight.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Nicole, our second guest speaker, and then we'll go ahead and do the question and answers then, okay? Our next speaker is Nicole, and she's going to speak to parents of kids ages 13 to 17. Nicole Wofford is an assistant professor of social work at Westfield State University in Massachusetts, where she teaches advanced adult and family clinical social work courses, as well as courses on diversity and social justice, social welfare, policy analysis, and school social work. As a licensed clinician in California and Massachusetts, Nicole has provided consultation to school districts about student mental health, suicide risk assessment, and prevention. And she has provided consultation to community-based organizations on issues of race, equity, and inclusion. Nicole has worked in outpatient adult and adolescent community mental health settings and managed a children's outpatient mental hospital. Welcome, Nicole. Hopefully, did I mess up your last name?
I pronounce it Wolford, but that's okay.
My apologies.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Good afternoon or evening, everyone. And just thank you to the Bright team for this invitation to talk about this topic. As what was mentioned, I've worked with adolescents, and unfortunately, many of them are going through some very difficult times and have needed, for the purposes of their own safety and their care and their well-being, to be evaluated in a crisis setting. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit, going back a little bit from what Sarah was talking about, just to start with what is considered a mental health crisis. How does a parent know that their child is actually having a mental health crisis? And so I'm going to go sort of break that down and then move forward to some of the things that parents need to know and some of the things that parents might want to do. So in terms of thinking about what is a mental health crisis, what constitutes that? How does a parent know that their child is having one? So one of the things you want to be paying attention to as a parent is your teenager, when I'm saying teenager, I'm talking about your tween or your teen, this is 13 to 17-year-olds, demonstrating behaviors that are demonstrating and showing that they are unable to be safe with themselves. So what does that mean? That means that they could be engaging in self-harming behaviors. They could be cutting themselves. They could be stabbing themselves. It could mean that they are really scratching themselves very deeply. It could mean they are threatening to harm themselves or suicide. It's those kinds of things where a parent says, uh-oh, I think that my child is demonstrating they are not able to be safe with themselves. I am very worried. So those are all huge red flags. Next is the teenager is demonstrating behaviors that they are unable to be safe around other people. And what this could look like is this child is demonstrating that they might be very agitated, they have verbal threats, they are exhibiting violence, they have out of control behavior, they might be destroying property, they might be threatening to kill someone else. It's those kinds of behaviors. All of those are gigantic red flags that this is a child that is demonstrating behaviors that they are not safe around other people. It's also important to realize that in this particular age category, 13 to 17, unless there are some medical needs, there might be some level of disability that the child is exhibiting, we would be looking at a child in that age range that could perform daily tasks on their own. So they're able to feed themselves, they're able to bathe themselves, they can brush their teeth, they can do their own hair, they can, dress themselves in the morning. And so this would be an example of a teenager or a tween that's demonstrating behaviors that show that they're unable to take care of their own basic needs. And particularly, this needs to stand out if this is a child who at one point used to be able to engage in these behaviors, but you see a decline in their capacities or ability to do so. So all of these would be considered red flags, and for a parent to become very concerned about what is going on with my child. So in addition to those three categories, some other things to look for in children of this age. For some children, they can exhibit rapid mood swings. That means a rapid shift from high to low, energetically, emotionally. For some, they become very fidgety. They might have some challenges sitting still. They can be pacing. You can see some children who can become suddenly depressed and withdrawn. They can be happy or calm. That happens after a period of having been depressed. So you're seeing these real significant behavior changes, which should be red flags. Other children, you can see they begin to isolate. So they will have isolating behaviors. They don't want to go to school anymore. If they have a part-time job, they don't want to go. If they're engaged in sports or after-school activities, they no longer seem to be interested in these things. They may withdraw from family, withdraw from friends, things like that. All of those things should be red flags for parents to pay attention to. Similarly, these kids may start to develop a loss of interest in all kinds of people, places, and things that they typically enjoyed or loved engaging in. Some kids have their favorite ball, they might have their favorite video game, things like that. They stop having interest the way that they used to. And so you just see this shift and this withdrawal again of what they used to participate in, and now they're no longer seeming to have that level of zest for life and energy. For some, when it becomes even more extreme, there are some parents that might notice that their child seems to be losing touch with reality. And when we experience this, we're talking about a child who may be experiencing what's called psychosis. When a child or a person is experiencing psychosis, whatever's happening with them in terms of their, what we would call their faculties, how they would typically see, how they would typically hear, how they would typically feel, how they would typically smell. It's thinking about the senses and being able to see market changes in how that person is perceiving the realities around them. So in certain situations, you might have some young people who become confused or disoriented. They might be unable to recognize family members or recognize their friends. They can start to develop very strange ideas. They can think that someone might be after them. They might have some difficulty understanding what people are saying. They can begin to hear voices. They can report seeing things that other people can't see. Those are all things to be aware of and for parents to become very concerned about and make sure that you get that child assessed and evaluated. Some children also can develop what's called paranoia. Paranoia, when we think about that, we're talking about this very unrealistic distrust of others. It can look like extreme fear of other people. It can look like feeling like people are out to get them. It can include hiding behaviors. Those sorts of thoughts and behaviors, again, red flags, should be a real concern for a child to become assessed, to be assessed and evaluated. So next, I'm going to go and hone in on something that is more specific, and that is, how does a parent know if a child might be thinking about or considering suicide? The thing to remember is that many, many, many people, from children, adolescents, or adults, actually do not necessarily, it's not a guarantee that they are going to demonstrate any sign. We can only do the best that we can in having conversations with our children, hoping that if they are struggling with something, if there's something about their own behaviors that they feel worried about or concerned about, that they will bring those forward and bring those to the parents. Because it's not possible to recognize all the signs every time. But if there are some signs, these are some things that you want to be paying attention to. What the research has shown is that there are some typical patterns that a lot of people will display if they are considering suicide. One is if a person, this child, is starting to give away their personal possessions, especially some of their most prized possessions. That should be a red flag that this child might be thinking about suicide. Now, just one of these things isn't necessarily enough. You want to also look to see, is there a pattern of things? So not only giving away prized possessions, they could be talking as if they're going somewhere, as if they're going away forever. saying goodbye, leaving notes, things like that. Again, red flags. Personally, if you also think about what could be going on, what might be going on in the inside of this person, you're going to be paying attention to, again, those marked behavioral changes. Oftentimes, there's a rapid shift. When a person has made a decision that they are no longer going to be here, oftentimes you will see mood changes and behavioral changes that can go in either direction. You can see a depression that also that lifts. You can also see people who seem okay and then fall into a depression. So any sort of major shift in mood, again, you want to pay attention to that. You also want to pay attention to this child is taking steps to sort of close out things, to sort of tie up some loose ends. They could be organizing their personal things, ending romantic relationships, ending friendships, things like that. Those should be some things to pay attention to. Verbalizations such as, oh, I wish I was dead, or I'd probably be better off dead. Huge red flags to be paying attention to. If a parent were to find that a particular child is stockpiling things, stockpiling such as hiding pills, hiding weapons, knives, things that can actually result in severe bodily harm or death, again, a severe red flag. If a child is exhibiting behaviors where they have a preoccupation with death and dying, talking about it all the time, sort of ruminating over it, absolutely, that is a red flag. And again, a sudden cheerfulness after a period of being very down. Again, that's that shift in mood that feels very sudden and strange that you want to pay attention to. So I think Sarah did a wonderful job talking about, what services might be out there. I would just add to that, similar when she was talking about, having the umbrella on the sunny day. One of the things that I oftentimes will tell parents is that, once your child has a crisis, it's important to be informed and prepared because there could very well be the next one. I've had parents make sure that they have the telephone numbers of the crisis services right there in plain view, that they're easily accessible. When a child is in crisis, you don't want to have to run around and try to find the phone numbers. You want to have them in an easily accessible place. A lot of these young people at these ages have their own cell phones. So people who are in the home who are going to be involved in the care of that child should also not only have this information that's written and accessible, but to keep these numbers handy in your cell phone so that all you need is to have your phone and the numbers that you need are right there at that particular time. I think I will just say a couple of other things is it is super important and one of the most challenging things I think for parents is in a crisis, just by the mere fact that you are in a crisis, it is okay to recognize that you internally are feeling panicked, scared, confused, sad, don't know what to do, and more. Okay, those are absolutely normal reactions. This is a crisis, and so your body is going to be ramped up in similar ways that the people around you, their bodies are going to be ramped up. Our bodies are designed to be activated when it is a crisis situation. As much as possible, however it's possible for the parents or the caregivers when a child is in crisis, to be as calming and soothing as possible, okay, is going to go a long way in helping the scared, triggered, perhaps depressed, suicidal, self-harming, whatever's going on with the child, be able to trust the adults around them that they are safe and that they are going to be cared for. Now, that's a mouthful and is much, much easier said than done because the key is really in that relationship. In my experience, I've worked with kids that don't want to go. They absolutely do not want to go to the hospital. And I've worked with some young people that do want to go. They know that they need containment and they need safety. Where some of the struggles are, the biggest struggles are the students that really mostly don't want to go, but there's a part of them that knows that they probably should go. And then there's the other young people that mostly want to go, but there's also a part of them that is really ambivalent and doesn't want to go. Well, on both of those, there's some wiggle room usually. And so oftentimes the child that is seeking whichever parent, caregiver, grandparent, whoever it is, that feels like their safe person, if there's a safe person for them, those are the ones oftentimes in those crisis situations that need to be pulled in and called upon to help the child settle as much as possible, to have these conversations and inform them about what the plan is going to be. The reason why I say that, and it's not always possible, but I've worked with many, many families where young people have felt tricked, they have felt very resentful, and sometimes they have to be. I'm not saying not to do it, but if a child can be empowered and informed for their own safety about what is going to happen, that can help preserve part of the relationship when the parent is taking over and saying, as your parent, it is my job to keep you safe. And I will be right there with you. I will be right there with you every step of the way. So I will stop there. We'll see if there's any Q&A. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. My gosh. Victor and I are going to be tossing around some questions, but I'm just kind of letting a lot of that sink in this moment. Both of you, that was just such a great pairing of things to think about. Victor, do you want to start with?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you both so much. I've done this now, I think 3 times. And every time I learn something, every time I hear something different,
Yeah.
every time I get more comfortable with the information, which is hard information to take in. And the
Yeah.
way you both presented it was calming, and I could listen and I could go, okay, this is possible. Okay, that's such a great idea to do it that way. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for that. I just want to put that out there before
Yes.
I start. So I do have a question, and it's about children that are neurodiverse. And my question is, um, if my child is neurodiverse, and can't understand what's going on, or has a mental health condition where they panic in these situations, how can I help them as a parent? And you kind of touched on this a little bit, Nicole, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from either one of you.
I'll go second because I'll do the older kids. You want to start, Sarah, with the younger ones?
Sure. Yeah. I would say as parents, you really have so much information about what works well and not well for your kid. You know, neurodivergence is an umbrella term where so many different things are covered, that we don't want to kind of rely on a provider's understanding of what a particular symptom or diagnosis or experience is going to entail. So I think front loading the crisis team with that information that you have before the assessment, before the child gets to the hospital, can be really helpful. So if you know things like bright lights are really overstimulating to my kiddo, or my kiddo has a really hard time with folks of this gender or this presentation, or I know that you guys are there to keep my kids safe, but if they feel like they're being crowded, they're more likely to try to elope. Any of that information that you have, trying to give that heads up as soon as possible. And to try to sometimes, I think, give that when your kid is not in the room and the emergency evaluation has started already. Because by that point, the cat may already be out of the bag. The kiddo might already be starting to get ramped up because some of that information has not had a chance to be received by the staff. So this would be another thing where writing that stuff down before your family has that crisis, where things are calm, where things are collected, where you can ask your kid for that input, where you can ask your kid's therapist if they have one for that input, and having that in writing somewhere set aside, I think that will help make it easier to convey that information to the people that need it at the beginning of the process.
It's
Thank
helpful.
you.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is, and this is really depends on the child, right? Because every child is different. And when you ask the question, Victor, about, neurodiversity, that's just about anything that could be happening. But I really appreciated this idea of, the parent as expert in terms of knowing their child's wants, needs, sensitivities, and what that child might need for comfort and soothing in that crisis setting. And so one of the things that I've worked with some parents on is creating what's called a safety box. It's very similar in some ways when, someone is about to give birth and they have all of their things. They have their luggage and they have, their favorite magazines or whatever it is that they're going to be doing because they know they're going to be going very soon. So particularly in situations where there could be situations where children are at risk or repeatedly at risk and need to go to hospital and be evaluated. Having a safety box could be something that is just right there that the parent can grab and some important information. So for example, for a child that's on medications, with all the heightened emotion and people are asking so many questions, it might be a challenge to know, oh my goodness, what medications is my child on? When do they take it? What's the dosage? Who's the provider? Having a list of all of those things in the safety box, you just have it with you. You have it right there. You can even bring a pill or two of medications to let them know this is what my child is taking, this is the dosage, this is the frequency, and so forth. Whatever contact information that you might need. Again, if you don't have it in your cell phone, you also can have it in your safety box. So there is a list of contacts, the school, all the information from the hundreds of questions that they're going to ask. You can have all that information at the ready and just know you have it in case you need it. It's also important, again, depending upon the age of the child, what are some comforting and safe and soothing things that your child might need. Now, granted, if your child is a danger to themselves or others, they're not going to be able to bring anything in that is going to be considered something that could be used as a weapon or dangerous, harmful to themselves. But there might be things, for example, I'm seeing a cat. Cats are wonderful. If your particular child has a pet, take a picture of that pet. So that might be something that, having that tangible object as a self-soother might be helpful while you're sitting in the room waiting for the evaluation. So different things like that, I think, can be helpful with not just kids that, have been identified as neurodiverse, but I think any child or person could be really supported in a very, kind of fast-paced, scary environment with the people, places, and things that are considered safe enough for them to have with them.
Thank you. I'm really, really appreciating. I think, Victor, you used the word calm before when just listening to both of you. I'm also getting the theme of just like preparation. And so kind of in those calmer moments or times for all of us and for parents to think how can we prepare? So some of these things I feel like that you're both offering are so useful around preparation. But my next question has to do with, and thank you, kind of going back and forth with some of these, but I guess the question I'd like to pivot to is if a child goes to a hospital or has had a crisis or starts a partial program or something like that, it's the first time my kid has gone through a crisis and then comes home, what advice do you have around worries about rocking the boat when my kid comes back? Or what if I get upset with my child? Is that going to trigger them if we just went through an experience? Having, can I have the same expectations of my child as I used to? What if I get mad at my child? That kind of thing. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll kick it off by saying your kid and you live in the real world and have to keep living in the real world. And the hospital, the partial, it's this little bubble that's almost not quite the real world. And the rules may be different and the plan may be different, but most of the time, you and your kid are going to exist in the real world and hopefully thrive in the real world. And the real world does have things like homework and fights with your siblings and frustrations. And we can't bubble wrap our kids from that and prevent any stress or any bad thing from happening to them. And certainly part of the therapeutic process is saying, hey, life is going to throw things at you. How do you as a person, how do you as a family, how do you cope with that? So I don't think our goal should be removing all stress or upset, because we're not going to be able to do that. And then we're just going to start to beat ourselves up and feel shame and blame if something goes wrong. Certainly, are we going to try to take a chill pill to the best of our abilities and keep things as reasonably mellow as we can? Of course, we're going to do our best. We're going to cut ourselves some slack and say that our kid may have been the one to go to the hospital, but the whole family went through that crisis and is having the experience of that heightened activation of our sympathetic nervous system, which again is saying, oh, there was danger, 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 danger. And then trying to calm down out of that danger space. The whole family is going through that project. So perhaps we're all going to be a little on edge. Perhaps we're all going to not be at our best, but we're going to try. So I think managing the expectation that says the goal is not to remove all stress, the goal is to reduce stress, the goal is to be kind. But the goal is not bubble wrap, because you can't take the bubble wrap with you out of the house. You can't take the bubble wrap with you to school. And we want the home environment to kind of mimic to the best of its ability what you're going to be experiencing in the rest of the world. We want there to be some consistency across environments. And just like tough things are going to happen at school, tough things are going to happen at home, tough things are going to happen in the therapist office. I think keeping that line of communication open within what is normal for your family culture, certainly saying like, hey, how are we as a family gonna handle tough stuff when it comes up? Absolutely. But I think a big part of this question is just cutting yourself some slack and saying that you losing your temper is not what causes a mental health crisis for your child. I wish parents were that powerful that they could cause those problems, because then they could also cure those problems. But mental health does not work like that. Parents are not all powerful in that way. And I think there's something really compassionate and really important about reminding yourself that you do not cause your child's mental health crisis. You're going to be an important part of the team that helps support it and helps nurture their mental health, but you didn't cause it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I would just say, add to that as well that it is also, in a lot of parents that I've worked with, just dealing with the guilt of feeling as if they've caused it, right? Feeling as if. And so because, as Sarah was saying, the entire family has been through this crisis, right? Even though maybe one person, one child was the one that went to the hospital, everyone in the family is a system. So everyone in the family has been impacted. So one of the things to really think about too is how can the other members of the family also get support? Fortunately, there are a number of support groups for parents of children that have, mental health challenges. Similarly, going back to the neurodiversity, there are groups for parents that have children that are neurodiverse. And so we have in-person things, and because of the pandemic, fortunately, we have things like this that are online and virtual. And so people can access resources and supports that are out there to be able to come together with other parents who are in similar situations. That is one of the most supportive things for parents, to feel like I'm not alone in this. It's not just my kid. There are many, many, many children and adolescents who struggle with mental health. And so being able to be in groups of parents who are working to support each other, to learn about resources, give each other tips, give each other high fives, it's a journey. It's a journey. And so being able to reach out in those ways is very important. It's also important to recognize that when there is someone in the family that has something severe going on, it could be a mental health severity, but it could be a physical health severity. But because the entire family is impacted, at a particular stage, that family might want to seek family therapy. How do we work together as a family and really process and reorganize ourselves so that we are as supportive as we can, not only for this child who's been hospitalized, but for perhaps other children that are in the family that are also impacted? How do we come back together and reorganize? And then in some situations, it's important for couples, if there is two parents who might not be on the same page, they might not be understanding what the child needs. That can cause tension, that could cause conflict, it can cause confusion in the family. Sometimes couples need to go and do their own adult to adult work and understanding, how do we parent this child? How do we do it? And so sometimes that can be helpful as well.
Thank you so much. I feel like that was just, I'm passing it over to Victor again, but that was just such a great plug for Nicole mentioned how powerful and important support groups can be. And just a reminder, as Lakeisha shared with all of us, we every single week, this team runs free support groups for parents of elementary age kids 1 week, parents of middle high school 1 week, BIPOC affinity support group 1 week, and the flyers in the chat on YouTube Live. So back to you, Victor.
Thank you, Megan, for putting that in there. That's great. And thank you both again for answering those questions. The last question was really, really powerful in the sense that what a nice reminder to have that it's not parents' fault. Like if they act a certain way and they don't smile enough, they get angry, they lose their patience. And Nicole, you set me up beautifully for my question. So, here it is. How, like, if you have a child that goes in the hospital for a period of time and you have a sibling at home, whether they're older or younger, you can have both those answers. You talked about, the family therapy, but what else can you do to support that child that's not in the hospital, the child that's, the other child, the child that maybe not be getting the attention because this crisis is happening and the child needs lots of support that's in the hospital and comes home from the hospital. How do you help that child?
I'll take this one to start. The first thing that just came to my mind is, and thank you so much for bringing that up, because it is so true that there could be one other child, there can be multiple other children. And because this becomes a family issue, right? It becomes in a lot of families, the one that is, let's say, grabbing the most attention of the parents becomes identified sometimes as the problem in the family, which has a ripple effect on all of the other kids as well. And so you will see some interesting behaviors that can occur. And you can also sometimes see, sometimes not see a mindset about what's going on with some of the other kids. Some of the other children may check out, just be checked out. And they can be checked out for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's because they have an understanding that their parents have their hands full, right, with that one over there. And they don't want to add additional pressure, additional stress, be an additional burden to the family. Have some kids who will rise to the occasion and become the pseudo parent to some of the other kids because the parents clearly are unavailable because they're so focused on this one child. Someone has to parent these other kids. And so you'll see children stepping into this role of pseudo parenting and pseudo maturity, stepping into the role of taking care of others. You will also see some behaviors where they are themselves begin to exhibit some mental health distress. They become more anxious. They start having challenges in school. They start having difficulty, socially. They're demonstrating, some of the effects of the stress that is live. It's real. That's happening in the home. And so it's important for parents to recognize that when one child is having some difficulty, it may not be just that one child. There may be other children in the home where it looks different, but also might be struggling or suffering as well. So that's another plug for the family therapy, is let's really get some support and some resources here of who can really hold and be a container for what is happening and what this family is going through. even though the family as a whole is going through it, it's important to remember that every single person that makes up a family is an individual. And they're going to be having their own understanding, their own way of coping with that particular stress. So there may be, and it could be very valuable for every single person in a family to have a touch point to be able to check in. How are you doing? How are we doing as a family? And what support and resources do we need as a family as well as individually?
Thank you.
I would add on top of that that I know I'm biased as a therapist, but I'm just going to say therapy for everyone, always, all the time. It is so hard to find a therapist that's qualified to work with you on the thing you want to work on, a therapist that takes your insurance, a therapist that has openings that fit your schedule. You do not want to try to be juggling that for you and your family members in a time of emergency or immediately after an emergency. I'm a big believer in saying you should start therapy when you're feeling good and there's nothing wrong and things are feeling really manageable in your life. That's the time that you have the energy to like research your options, to interview therapists for your different kids and their different needs. And that the time to do that is when things are feeling good. So that if there is a crisis, there is a team member to talk to, there is someone to pull in. That is a smooth transition to that plan. So I think any person, regardless of their age, regardless of their situation, who is just living in the world these days would benefit from therapy. I have never had a single patient who has come to me and said, I'm not really sure why I'm here, but I thought it might be a good idea to just check under the hood and do some preventative maintenance. I've never had a patient walk out of the appointment 10 minutes in and say, you know what? Never mind, I've got nothing going on. So I think in those calm moments is when to find a therapist, when to find all the kinds of therapists, whether they're individual, couples, families, siblings, to have those resources identified. The other thing I'm going to say too is like write that person's name down. And I've had experiences where I've had patients that I've worked with for over a year who go into the hospital with their family member and they can't remember my name. And they know me and we have worked together really closely. But in that moment of panic, some of that stuff just falls right out of your brain because your brain is focused on, I'm being chased by a tiger. I've got to fight. I've got to freeze. I've got to flee. That's not the part of the brain that's like, oh, Sarah Schakowsky is my therapist and here's her phone number. Writing it down. The other thing I just remembered too on that topic is sometimes hospitals have really terrible cell phone reception. So if you have that saved in a cloud folder somewhere, but you have to download something to get to it, that might not be the best way to get that information in the hospital. Having it written down, having in that emergency box, having a backup, having a picture on your phone, having that saved in your child's cell phone too, having backups to the backup to the backup, because sometimes the systems we set up do fail. But we want therapy to be in place before it's needed. I think that is just such a wonderful opportunity to give you and your family that opportunity to work on your mental health when you can and you have the bandwidth to work on.
Thank you so much. This is feeling so info rich and really practical, and really, really appreciating both of you for that. My next question is about thinking about a child going to an intake, a crisis intake, whether it's an emergency room or with a crisis services clinician. And I know how severe things are at home with my child. And then I hear my child speaking and answering questions and they're downplaying, and maybe I've heard my child say that they want to die or they don't want to be here anymore. But when they're asked that question by the therapist or the social worker, they say, no, never thought of that. I'm fine, that kind of thing. What should parents think about? Do any advice around that?
Yeah, so that's a hard one, right? That can be a challenging one. But what first came up for me is thinking about what would that parent do if they found their child on the floor, passed out, having, from a physical condition, a physical medical condition, maybe had, aspirated blood, they had whatever the situation was. You take that child to the hospital, they get evaluated and assessed, they're being interviewed, and that parent hears a similar sort of thing. The child is downplaying it. Oh, it's no big deal. Okay. In a physical health situation, that parent, more likely than not, would say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Actually, and this is the thing that I saw. I walked into the room, I saw that the child was, covered, blah, blah, blah. The reason why this is important is because in those moments where that is happening, the child is being interviewed. And again, we have to factor in the age of the child, right? We're talking about a 5-year-old versus a 17-year-old, very different. But in those situations, if it appears that the child is downplaying certain things, as a parent, okay, you have to remember, for a lot of young people, a lot of older people, being in that situation, being hospitalized, being asked these very, very personal questions, being asked questions that a lot of young people don't talk about, don't want to talk about, and you are a complete stranger asking them some of the deepest things about what they're feeling and what's going on in their heads. Yes, it makes a lot of sense that they would want to downplay that. They don't know what you're going to do in response if they're honest and tell you the truth. What's important in those moments is for parents to recognize that and to be able to say in those moments, I know that it might be hard for you to share what really just happened back at the house, but because I love you and I want them to understand to the best of their ability what's going on for you so that they can help you, I'm going to fill in some things that you may not feel comfortable telling the whole story about. So if you want me to share it, I can talk to you. You don't have to answer. I'll support you in being able to talk to this nurse, to this doctor, to this aide, whoever it is, about what's been going on, because we really want you to get to the right place and the right people who can help you. So encouraging them to that you're going to be there to support them, and also validating it's hard to talk about these things. It's understandably hard to talk about these things, but this is the only way we can get the help that we need.
I'm going to add too that it can be helpful sometimes to have multiple adults speaking on behalf of a child in crisis who are sharing different perspectives, because sometimes it does start to feel like, well, parent told us one thing, kid told us another thing, and we don't know how to weigh those two different truths as we're making our plan. If there's another trusted adult who's weighing in and saying, this is what I have observed and how I know that this is an emergency, whether that's a teacher, whether that's a grandparent, whether that's a family friend, and that family friend, not to say that they're not deeply affected by what your child is going through, but they might not be feeling the really visceral crisis emergency that you are. They might be able to speak from a calmer place and say, remember 2 months ago, they said this. Remember at the barbecue, they brought up this. They might have anecdotes that your crisis brain is having a hard time remembering. I also too think that sometimes writing that down, if you are at that point of feeling like the team is minimizing your concerns and saying, well, we think we can discharge the child, and you're saying, no, that's not safe. Let me tell you why. Writing that down and not mincing your words, writing down and saying, I am concerned my child is at risk of ending their own life because of this, because of this, because of this, and physically handing that to a staff person, they have to keep that. They have to put it in the chart. They can't just say, oh, I read it and then I threw it away. There are rules on having to store that as part of the medical record. Now you're shifting, I think, the lens a little bit, because the doctor's note may say, I think this child is safe to go home for these reasons. But now your note is right in there saying, no, they're not, and here's why. That's very different than the doctor reporting what it is that you have said to them. So writing that down again before you get to the hospital, if at all possible, having other trusted adults write it down, even if it's an email that they're sending to you that you're then forwarding to the crisis team. Stuff in writing, sometimes it gives you a chance to organize your thoughts. And I hate to say it this way, but sometimes it can carry a little bit more weight. And that can come from anyone. And technically, when we talk about privacy and we talk about HIPAA and we talk about who can say what to who, people in the child's life can hand information into the hospital. That does not mean the hospital is acknowledging that that child is a patient. That does not mean the hospital is saying, oh, yes, I'll pass that along to the provider who's seeing that patient. Because all of those things imply that the child exists as a patient, and that may be violating that child's privacy. But the nurse can say, you're handing me a piece of paper and I'm going to take it. And they can take it and walk away with it. So writing can be really powerful. Writing from a calm moment can be really powerful. And writing from a historical record where you're keeping notes over time, where you can say, 3 years ago, they said this, 2 years ago, they said this, 1 year ago, they said this. This is consistently coming up for them. They didn't just have a bad day because they had a bad test grade. This is evidence of their worsening mental health over time. So I'm a big believer in writing stuff down. I'm a big believer in asking other people in your child's life to write stuff down.
That's great.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I have one more question before we wrap up. So if my child, thinking about my child and thinking about if my child went to the hospital, went to Children's Hospital here in Boston and had some physical problems, I would want to move in with them. I would not want to leave them. I would get a cot. I would sleep on the floor. I am not leaving my child. So looking at that, when it comes to mental health, how do I leave my child? And I feel so guilty. I feel like I've created this. I feel scared. What if they send me? I'm scared. I don't want to stay. I know it's different. But I want to hear, what do I do? What do I tell my child? What do I do with myself who wants to move in? And know that it's not helpful, but that's what I want to do. I don't want to leave my baby alone. So I'd love to hear.
I can go. So I'm just, I'm a parent myself, and I'm right there with you. Is just validating that parental pull, right? That parental instinct that wants to be there with your child. You don't want to just send your vulnerable child to these people in these places where they're going to be alone and scared and just by themselves without you. And yet, for better or worse, these are how our systems are set up, that we have to entrust and turn our children over to these people in their best efforts to try to keep our child safe. And so in those moments, there's going to be a point of separation, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, honey, I wish that I could stay here with you. I wish that I could be here with you. And unfortunately, I can't, but please know I'm going to be thinking about you every moment. I'm going to be, we're getting a hotel down the street, or, we live 2 blocks away. I will be here, when I can to visit you, all the different things to try to reassure and comfort. That's one piece of letting the child know where your heart is right there with them. And if you could be physically there with them, you would. You just can't. It's against the rules. Okay? The other part of it, though, is, in the field in which I work, we talk about the use of what's called transitional objects. And even though the child needs to be safe, there could be something, again, going back to that safety box or that comfort box, going back to the piece of paper that Sarah was talking about, there could be a little note that a parent writes and says, I love you, and just gives a little slip of paper and puts it in the hand of that child so that they can hold on to that and carry that with them and say, yes, there's a part of my parent that's with me. There are things like that that can be done when we are in situations, when parents are in situations where they really have no choice, they've made the decision to move forward and bring the child to that setting, there's a time when they're going to have to turn their child over to entrust in the care of the people that are there. It's hard. It can be absolutely terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So there are the things that can be done on the front end, and then there's when there is the reunion, being able to have the parent and the children come together. And if they're up for it, if the child is up for it, talking about how it was being separated. And now let's spend some quality time together, right? That's the repair on the other side. So go ahead, Sarah.
I'm going to add two things that I know sounds like they're in direct conflict with each other, but I want to make sure that there's always the both. There is nothing wrong with having a conversation with the crisis team to say, I know my kid, I know it's going to be hard for them, and I know what I can do to help with that. What are your facility's rules? And let me make my full court press for why we need to adjust those rules so that my kid can be successful. There is nothing wrong with going to bat and saying, this is what I think will help my child thrive in the best way that they can, being stuck in a hospital bed for days. On the other side of that, too, is the knowledge that you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself, too. And your child, where you know they are safe, they can't harm themselves, they are being taken care of. Sometimes there are other equally important things that you need to attend to during that time. And it is okay that your attention is divided, that emotionally you were in that hospital room with your kid, but you were going to the grocery store, you were making breakfast for your other kids, you are cleaning up the house because it's a mess and you haven't had a minute. You are still doing the things that don't stop just because your loved one is in the hospital. And attending to those things so that your child has a safe, warm, clean, the electricity bill is paid, house to come back to on the other side of that hospitalization. That's part of how you take care of them too. And that's a very adult framework that of course your kiddo doesn't necessarily grasp, but understanding that the work of parenting encompasses all of those other things in addition to caring deeply about your child and spending time with them. You were still very much a parent and doing a parenting project when you were not physically with them in the hospital.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Nicole. You two were amazing. Thank you for this information. I really appreciated all of the awareness around what are parents looking for, the preparation piece. How can we prepare for that? Even just like before we even get to the hospital. I just feel like this information is so important because a lot of times we go into these scenarios, if you do end up in them and you don't know what to do, you don't know what to expect. So you gave us some things to expect, but also how to prepare for that, how to help our child in the moment. And then also reminding us that we also, as caregivers, need to reach out for help. And it's not just us we need to look out for. We also need to look out for the rest of the family. I think that's really important piece. And then thank you so much. Therapy when we're feeling well. What an amazing gift.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think one of the big takeaways, I really appreciate how you both talked about, like, this is the way things could go, but you have a voice and use it. And I love the idea of writing down, what your concerns are, because sometimes you get in there and you're in crisis as well. It just, things don't go the way you think they're going to go. So thank you. I want to remind everyone that we do have our parent support group meetings, and we would love to have you join us. Next Tuesday, we will have an elementary age group, or parents of elementary age students. The following Tuesday will be middle school and high school aged, parents of high school age students. And then finally, our last group of the month will be BIPOC family members. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Sarah. Thank you. I'm gonna end our stream here.